Hello, my name is Ed Hansberry, and my favorite Power Query feature is working with lists. Welcome to Power Query Magic.
All right, so welcome, Ed. Thank you for coming on the show.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. So I think, like me, you're an accountant turned Power BI consultant.
That's right. I have in the U.S. It's a CPA license, certified public accountant. I did that for a few years as a public accountant. Got into business, and then eventually got out of it completely and turned into Power BI. So
And
I
where,
think there's a
where,
few of us in that same situation.
yeah, there seems to be a little sort of trend of, the number crunchers of the world like us just sort of getting into this data thing. And I don't know, it's probably natural that people who like the numbers and the data get into this stuff. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's an interesting world now.
Yeah, at a
So
point, it's the debit and credit journal entries get a little bit boring and routine, and the data exploration's like, oh, this is kind of cool. So
yeah,
that's where I
yeah.
drifted.
And so, because you were you were a director of finance at a couple of places from looking at your LinkedIn profile and things.
Right, right.
Mattel, which was a name I recognize, but
Toy company.
Mega Brands was it as well?
Yep. So they make a toy called Mega Blocks, which is a
Oh, right,
competitor to
yeah,
Lego. So it's kind of
right, yeah,
the
yeah,
really big ones for the little kids.
yeah.
So yeah, and they were actually acquired by Mattel is how I got to Mattel. So that's how I transitioned to
Ah,
Mattel.
and but in that role, were you hands-on with Excel in that role then?
Oh yes.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
you were proper getting in the weeds.
Tremendous amount. Yeah, it was, like I said, it's a lot of data analysis. You're looking at forecasts, you're looking at sales history, you're looking at production, all kinds of things. So, and I'm the kind of person, I don't want reports. I want the raw data. I'll generate the report, right? So,
Right,
whatever
yeah,
the tool
yeah.
is, just give me the raw data and let me deal with it myself.
Yeah, yeah. And did you dabble with VBA? Were you getting
Yeah, that's really how I got started. Actually, I got started with Lotus 123 macros even before that.
Yeah,
And then
same,
Excel,
same.
VBA macros, and then Microsoft Access integration into Excel because, Excel could only handle 60 some odd thousand rows and it was kind of slow.
Yeah,
And then, eventually we got to a place where Power Query and Power Pivot came around and Power BI. So, but I've done all
yeah.
of that.
I was the same. Lotus 123. That's where I, you know,
Hmm.
got my taste for what was possible with this stuff.
So
And that was
we're old
before I
timers.
started my accounting. That was. So I was the Excel guy because I'd done this little sort of year out where I learned some of this Lotus 123 stuff. I did a placement year at university. It's like, oh, this stuff's good.
Yeah.
Did you play about with Microsoft Query, MS Query?
I did. I did that a little bit. I didn't really do a lot of transformations with it, but I found it was a really good way to stage stuff in Access and then use Microsoft Query to go into Access and pull data out and
Right.
then
Yeah.
drop it
Yeah.
into a sheet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's sort of like the little intro to this sort of Power Query world for me was that Microsoft Query.
mhm.
We were just using that for a couple of years, starting to just automate this extraction of data from, you know, various places, other Excel files or Access databases. It's like, oh, it
Yeah,
was
you
it
could
was
connect it right up to an ODBC data source. So
yeah,
you could go
yeah.
to a lot of backend systems with it as long as you could get a driver on your computer. So
Yes.
it was so much better than extracting reports in a text file format, and then you spend hours formatting it into a table because it's all, it's human readable, it's not computer readable. So Microsoft Query was a neat little tool that
Yeah.
very few people use. I had forgotten about that though, but yeah, I use that quite a bit.
I'd forgotten about the ODBC thing. So yeah, that was a job I did for a client way back, was tapping into like a job costing system using an
Hmm.
ODBC driver and MS Query and just automating all this stuff that pulled in and a few formulas to do some journals and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just amazing how the journey's come along. And I think we were, I think I feel a little bit that the Power BI folks, which we are now, part of, include myself in this group. But there's this thing of sort of, it's all new and it's all, citizen developer thing is this whole new concept. But really, it's just made it easier what we used to do in Excel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think we
Oh
just
yeah.
used to find ways around it and do this sort of stuff, and nowhere near as slickly and, as user-friendly way. But we were always doing it, I think.
Oh yeah. You mentioned VBA. Except for one thing I did about 3 years ago, I haven't used VBA in like 5 or 6 years because Power Query just removed the need for almost all of it.
Yeah,
So, and it's so much easier and it's bulletproof. VBA, you're endlessly tweaking the code because something else happens. And so it's
yes.
okay. How do we do this? And I don't miss it either. VBA was not my favorite thing to work with. Not for data transformation anyway.
No, no, and it's got its place. I still use it a little bit for certain things, but yeah, like you say, the data cleanup stuff, just
Yeah,
it's just
doesn't
so
compare.
much easier now. Yeah,
Hmm.
easier to debug, easier to explain to someone,
Hmm.
all that side of things. So yeah, it's a different world. So and so what is your role now, and where are you working? I see you donning the obviously people listening to the podcast won't notice this, but Ed is donning a very fashionable P3
Yeah, yeah.
top there. So
About 2 years ago, I left my full-time job and started doing Power BI consulting on my own. And I decided I really liked working with Power BI, but I didn't like doing sales. So I interviewed with P3 Adaptive, which is Rob Colley's company. It used to be Power Pivot Pro. Of course, a lot of people
yeah,
know him. He used to be on the Excel team at Microsoft, and he wrote the first, like the really successful Power BI book. So I've been with them now, right, coming up on a year in May, and I
right,
love
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I've got one large client that I'm predominantly working with, but there's a lot of other things that I get involved in, and um, so that's my thing now is just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
focusing on helping educate the customers on what's available in Power BI, Power Query. How do we push things back to original data sources? Because, I recognize Power Query is not always the best thing. So it's just kind of figuring out what fits and what's right and where do you move it and where do you do it. So I really enjoy it. And it helps
Yeah.
educate them because there's so much going on with Power BI. There's a new feature every month and a new major feature at least a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
Data flows and composite models and stuff like that. So it's really
And
interesting.
trying to keep up is just it's really a losing battle. I think it's
Oh
sort of
yeah, you you know
you just fall behind slower if you really read a lot.
right.
But
I think 4 or 5 years ago you could know everything there was to know about Power BI. You may not be an expert at it, right? You may not know all
yeah,
the DAX, but you would know all the
yeah, yeah,
features.
yeah,
Now you kind of got to start specializing. Are you working with, you know, small models in small companies? Are you working with aggregations and then now hybrid tables and,
yeah.
billions of rows with certain, and you start to specialize. You got, goals and it's just there's so many features. It's like you said, it's a fire hose every month of new features, and it's difficult to keep up.
All I'm trying to do is just be aware that something is there,
Hmm.
so that then if and when the need arises, I either look it up again or I contact somebody who I know is good at this stuff, and just yeah, like I say, specialization because it is
That's
vast now.
that's the key, right? It's not knowing how to do everything. It's knowing what's possible and being very quick to learn how to do the thing the client needs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because if they're just doing random Google searches or whatever, they may not even know what to look for. But so yeah,
totally.
exactly.
And when you look for something, you've got to double check when it was written
Hmm.
because stuff in it, somebody might be looking up, I don't know, content packs now or something like this, and
Right.
seeing how to, whereas stuff just doesn't exist, or things that weren't possible a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, and now
Hmm.
possible, and it's just like, oh. So yeah, and sort of going back to picking up on the comment about Rob's book and stuff. So were you an early reader of the book
Oh,
and
it was my first.
the
It was my
blog?
first power. I guess it was really a power pivot book at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So you were in their early days.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually came across Power Query first. So I was a couple of years, I guess the book was the sort of first spot I got involved. But I had been using Power Query for a little while before I heard about or started to experience Power Pivot. And I think it was down to more about clients not having the right version of Excel
Hmm.
to actually start using Power Pivot, but Power Query was an add-in, so you could start to play about with that, and it was a bit of a progression from MS Query as well. So there was a more immediate need for that. So yeah, but I think that book's influenced so many people. It's
Yeah, and when I was first doing it, when the data was prepared properly, um, Power Pivot was great. And I learned Power Pivot first and then figured out that I could shape the data properly using Power Query
right.
instead of pre-shaping it using typical Excel style, you know, VLOOKUPs and whatever to get the
Yeah,
tables in the
yeah,
right way.
yeah.
And I actually learned that from Meanda Tracy. I took her
Okay,
course,
yeah, yeah,
and it was kind of a thing of okay, it wasn't a deep dive into the whole thing. It was kind of an overview of here's how you develop and you start here. So that's that's kind of how
yeah,
I got started with the whole thing once I put the pieces together.
yeah. And are you working face to face with clients, or are you remote, or what's the engagement look like for you?
Well, so right now it's all remote. It's 100% remote.
Right.
Well, I say that mine is still 100% remote, but we as a company have started going back to in-person stuff as of a couple of months ago, and I have my first in-person engagement. I think it's at the end of June. I'd have to go and look at the
Oh,
calendar.
okay. Right.
So I'm doing a training for a few days. So,
Oh,
and
okay.
I look forward to the in-person. It's working with people remote is fine. Training people remote to me is very, very difficult. I
Yeah.
can't see facial expressions. I can't, you know, when I have a room full of people and I see somebody with a scrunched up face and they're confused, I know I
Yeah.
need to stop and help or step back and figure it out. When, even if they have their cameras on, you don't really see that. So training for me remote is not my favorite thing. I would much rather train in person.
Yeah, I agree. Same thing happens. I've now, having done it quite a few times now, I'm sort of got a bit of more of a knack to it. But still, much prefer the sort of in person. It
Hmm.
works remotely. People like it, get positive feedback and stuff. But it's yeah, definitely a nicer thing. And like you say, just wandering around the room and just picking up on what people are doing, and
Hmm.
I find I learn more as well. I find people just click buttons that I would never click on. I go, "Whoa, how do you do that?" you know,
Right.
just because they're just trying stuff, and you just always learn.
Hmm. Exactly.
Non-stop learning. So you became a data platform MVP in 2020.
Right. Yep.
So how
Fall of
did that come
2020.
about? Yeah, what was the driver for that?
So I have been an MVP before. This is
Ah,
like, I think my 12th year cumulative, but
right.
not
Okay.
consecutive. I was an MVP for, it was originally Pocket PC and then became Windows Phone. So for like all of
Right.
2000 through 2011. And then, of course,
Okay.
that whole platform burned to the ground. So that ended. But I'd always been an Excel fan and I was messing around in Excel. But what really got me going with Power BI was the community forum. I'm also a super user there. And
Right.
if you want to learn how to do Power BI, whether it's Power Query or DAX or visuals, go to that forum and start answering questions because people ask the craziest stuff that their company needs. And you're like,
Yeah.
why in the world do you need that? Well, it doesn't really matter. How do we get that answer for you? And
Yeah.
so I, sometimes I'll spend 5 minutes on an answer. There are other times I will spend an hour on an answer just because I'm like, how does this work or what, and you start
Yeah.
going through and I'm firing up DAX Studio and I'm doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And it really teaches you that information. And of course, doing that kind of, I'll call it volunteer work, community involvement, whatever, helped get me the
Right.
MVP award. Plus, I do talks, user group talks, blog posts, things of that nature. So
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
stuff interests me.
I actually went on the community last night and had a look at your profile. You've got a badge you received recently for your 1,000th solution
Oh,
on
really?
the
Okay,
community. So, and
cool.
that let me just double check. That badge only held by 47 other people in the world.
Wow,
So
that's
top
impressive.
50 in
I'm
terms of
impressed.
solutions. So well deserved, I would say. No, that's
Nice. Okay.
and do you see a mix of question sort of types? Is it DAX? Is it what wins? What's the majority? DAX, Power Query, other stuff?
Well, I tend to drift to the Power Query forum, so it's segregated in
Right.
the forum. The thing that I find most interesting is there is a confusion about where the questions should be asked. They'll be
Mm,
in DAX and they're like, how do I add these columns and do this stuff? And I'm like, well, okay, we can do it in DAX, but let me show you how you should do it in Power Query. And
yes.
they don't they don't realize that's there until you show them, and then it's like, oh my gosh, that is so cool, because they
Yeah.
just see that spreadsheet grid kind of thing in Power BI and don't really pay attention to what's going on in Power Query. So
Yeah.
part of it is that kind of education. But if I've got nothing to do and I'm going to go to the forum and start answering questions, I typically open up the Power Query forum first, just
Okay.
because that's my first love.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there again any recurring themes in there that's sort of like or is it so random?
It's very random. Like I said, people are just asking some of the craziest questions sometimes, just depending on the need. Sometimes it's fairly
Yeah.
easy. How do I append, or just getting data to group properly, or whatever.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's not really a trend. It's because they're not asking general questions. They're working on a very specific project and they're stuck. And so they
Yes.
start copying and pasting and saying, I this is what I have and this is what I want. How do I get there?
Yeah.
And Power Query, it's there. If there's one way to answer the question, there's five ways to answer it. So you
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
working through what's the best, what's the fastest, what makes the most sense, and
Yeah.
then you explain it to them so they can. I don't like giving people just a blob of code and say, here, this works, go do it. I Here's what I'm doing and here's why I did it, and maybe that gives them the ability to modify it and tweak it later.
Yeah. Understanding sort of why you want them to do or why you're suggesting what you're doing
Hmm.
is a real help.
Yeah.
And I think as well within a bunch of the sort of forums and things that I've sort of answered questions on and things in the past, there is this one you're not even sure how to ask. People aren't even sure how to ask what they want, which is
Hmm.
quite hard, especially some of the forums that don't allow you to post images and stuff like this. I
Right.
think that the Power BI community one, you can post images now, can you? Yeah, you
Yes.
can post images on there. There was
Yes.
a point where I think you couldn't at some point, maybe, or am I getting confused? Has it always
No.
been images?
Well, so for at least the last 4 years, you've been able to paste
Right.
images
Okay.
in
Yeah.
pretty easily. So
Yeah. Yeah.
before then, you're probably right, but
Yeah.
but now it's because when you're working with visuals, because one of the forums is just how do I do a visual? Well,
Yeah.
unless here's what I have in Excel. How do I replicate that in Power BI? You got to have images, so
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
allows images.
And that element of knowing where to do something, whether it's in DAX or is it a calculated column, or do you do that calculated column in Power Query, or
Hmm.
or you can just give the answer of, oh well, you should just get your SQL database administrator to add you a view. And it's like, well,
Right.
not many people have that. Some
No.
people do, but most people, I would say most people don't have a luxury. Most, in terms of volume,
Right.
don't
I
have the
would agree.
luxury of some sort of SQL database admin who can just knock them up a view when they need to with just the fields they need. It's just not the reality. And people, like you say, just need to get their specific task done.
Right. Yep.
So,
And it's one person working in the accounts payable department somewhere, and they've just got
yeah,
this report and they need to do this thing. There is no way they're going to get their database administrator to sit down with them for an hour and go through and create a SQL view.
yeah,
Great, let's do it in Power Query because we can
yeah.
we can probably get it done.
Just get it done. That's Power Query's motto. really. I
Right.
think it's just get it done. And you were doing some blogging as well back in the
Yes.
day.
Yeah. I still
I
do.
so okay, so on your own blog now?
Well, so I just finished a blog on the P3 Adaptive site. So now I'm
Ah,
on
okay.
theirs, and it was on lists. So using
That was a good one.
text
I read
dot
that. Yeah.
combine to count words in paragraphs, and
Yes.
it's about really how lists work, but
Yeah.
it's that function in particular.
That was a nice breakdown of explaining lists. So I'd
Okay.
recommend folks go and have a read of that one.
Hmm.
And you're also pretty active on Twitter.
Yes,
Do you actually know how many tweets you've done?
I don't know. I don't even think it tells you anymore, but it's thousands.
Well, on the top of your profile, 11,000.
Really.
Okay.
That's such a
In
time waste.
So 4 years, 4 years, 11,000 tweets. So my maths isn't very good. So I obviously went into Excel. That's 7 a day.
That's yeah. And most of them are useless memes. Some of it's helpful, but most of
It's
it
fun.
I'm just making fun of stuff. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
this is ridiculous.
But I do
But
find it useful. It's a useful resource, Twitter.
it
What do you
is.
reckon?
It is. Yeah, I
Yeah,
but I try to always keep my Twitter it's either strictly Power BI. I'll occasionally veer off into history or other things, but I try to stay out of controversial areas
yeah,
because I don't want to get into all that mess. I just
yeah,
want to, just kind of go there and relax. And I read some, great posts by other people. You post a lot of videos there.
yeah,
There's a lot of great Power BI content. And I try to make that about 90 to 95% of my Twitter experience.
yeah. And I think if you end up just sort of following the sort of technical people and stuff, it can be a pretty engaging
Hmm.
space, and like you say, people share openly, and it's it's a good environment for that sort of thing. So apart from tweeting, then any other hobbies that keep you busy, keep you out of
No,
trouble?
other than from just completely out of Power BI, the only other thing I spend a lot of time on is I try to play chess. I'm
Oh
horrible at
yeah,
it, but I do enjoy it.
right. And I've seen you posting a bit about bikes as well. You go for a
Hmm.
bike
Yeah,
ride
I do. I
now?
do ride.
Yeah,
I've got a couple bikes, and I like to go. It's a great exercise on the weekend.
yeah.
Go mountain bike riding or road bike riding, things like
Because
that.
where are you living now?
So I'm in the Phoenix area of Arizona.
Oh, okay. So there's
So
some decent bike trails and stuff around
yeah,
there,
there's
and
some great bike trails here. A lot of the road, I have a road bike, and so there's a lot of bike paths on,
right.
the
Okay.
road has the bike trail on the side, so it's kind of safe for bikers. So
Yeah.
it's really nice.
So okay, let's get into the magic that's Power Query then.
Okay.
So do you remember when you sort of first came across it, or your first use case that you had for it, or what was the big
I
impact for you?
was I was pulling data out of a SQL server, and so I had connected Power Query to SQL Server, but I had written. I'm horrible at SQL. It's just not my language. I don't want to learn. I've told people my brain can only hold so much information, and it's right now it's DAX and M, and anything else
Yeah.
would just it doesn't stick. But I had written a couple of views and everything, and the first time I used Power Query, I'm like, oh, I have to go in the advanced editor and do all the code there.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
And it didn't click until a few days later. And I'm like, oh, wait, I can do all this here. And then I quit. And now I never use the advanced editor. It's just straight Power Query. Either
Yeah.
that or I write the view, connect to the view, and then do further transformations in Power Query. But
Yeah.
that was my first foray. And I don't remember what the project was. I think it was some sort of sales tax report that I needed to get. And I was trying to pull sales by ship to state and that kind of information because in the US we pay sales tax based on where the product winds up. And so, out of 50 states, I think, 37 or 8 of them collect sales tax that we were selling
Right.
in.
Yeah.
And so I had to create this big report and turn it over to the accountants. And it was, hundreds of thousands of rows of data, not massive, but more than you could easily do with Excel and VLOOKUPs. So,
Yeah. 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 And then it takes over.
mhm.
And then it naturally then leads into the into the sort of Power BI world as well then.
Yeah.
So did you start getting involved in Power BI again from sort of day one? Were you in there when it was early days or?
Yeah, yeah, so I got into Power Query and Power Pivot really right before Power BI kind of came out and became a
Yeah.
thing. And then I would say probably 6 to 9 months after that is when I started using Power BI. And I think that was probably a good time because I think that's when they actually started adding the DAX model and being able to do measures properly in Power BI. And it kind of became what we recognize it today. It was, not quite the designer that it used to be,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
became the proper tool. And the company that I was with, I had migrated them from, Office 2007 or even Office 2003 and
Okay.
network drives into Office 365 with Teams. Teams had just
Right.
started,
Okay. Right. Yeah.
and so we're moving all the stuff off the network, and I'm like, oh wow, Power BI, I can do all these reports, and they were using Crystal reports, and I
Right.
hate Crystal reports with a passion. I did not
Okay.
want to do that, and I'm like, that's gone. I'm getting rid of that, and we're going to do everything in Power BI because I get it, and it's so much
Right.
more powerful. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of how the whole thing started.
Right. And it's taken all those sorts of ERP systems, accounting systems, all these
Hmm.
sorts of things. Their reporting was always just left to, here's two out of the box reports that won't give you really what you need.
Right,
Hence the export to Excel that everyone then did and
right.
still does. And now you've got this sort of ability with Power BI in there as well to now, yeah, one tool for whatever reporting ERP system you have. Just learn
Yeah,
that.
I've worked with several ERP systems, and none of them have good reports, and I don't think they care. They just
No.
house the data. They know they cannot anticipate what the end user is going to need, so they give you your basic reports,
Yeah.
and here's your tables. Go write whatever you want to write. And so now you just got to find the right tool, which I
Yeah.
think 9 out of 10 times is Power BI.
It seems to be. I know these sort of tools come and go and things, a flavour of the months. But I don't know, maybe just because I'm heavily involved in it that I'm completely biased and it also feeds into the whole Excel world as well. The two link beautifully. But it just seems here to stay now. It seems to have won and it's just going to get
It
stronger. And
it does. Something feels different about Power BI versus older tools that, they could do a certain thing, but they didn't scale. And
yeah,
that's where I think the difference is. Power BI, is it 10,000 records or 50 million or, 2 billion? It scales to all of that as long as you're, modeling properly, et cetera. But
yeah,
it doesn't seem to be a one hit wonder. It seems like it's going to have some staying power.
yeah. Anything and Excel's success, I think, has been from just having this learning path that,
Hmm.
I'm still learning Excel 25 years on,
Right.
still learning new stuff. Still don't know it all. The more you learn, the more you know there is to learn. That's just this
Hmm.
sort of you're just chasing your tail basically a bit. And it's going to be the same with Power BI, but there's a ramp there that you can get more advanced. You can look back at what you did a year ago and laugh at yourself, and you can get better and better. And the same thing with Power BI. I think there's not a big brick wall. There's all these little incremental bits.
Yeah, I have started to enjoy Excel again. I got bored with Excel, you know, once Office 2007 hit. That was kind of a big
Yeah,
upgrade, but it
yeah,
still it redid the pivot tables and it redid the ribbon, but it didn't really do anything other than that. But then when Office 2016 came out, and it was really more of Office 365. I remember the first month they added like 6 new text functions, like text join or something. I forget what it was.
oh
I'm like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
kind of
Switch and
updating
stuff.
Excel,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then it's like, holy cow! Every 3 months there's a new function and a new feature. And now,
yeah,
again, it's like Power BI. I know what it can do. I don't know how to do a lot of it. Like I can't do these new Lambda functions. I
yeah,
played
yeah,
with it one time and I'm like, okay, I know it can be done. I'll go figure
yeah.
it out later if I need it. But it's Excel is the same way. It's a fire hose every month of new functions and information. And so it really interests me still. So I love the new dynamic array functions that just came out a couple of
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah, yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But
It's just
still, I don't spend a lot of time in it. It's Power Query. Even in Excel, when I'm in Excel, I'm probably in Power Query, right? And I'm doing
yeah,
something with it. I'm dropping it to a table. Might be using Power Pivot, but I'm in Power Query. So.
And favorite feature within Power Query?
So it's probably not a feature as much as just a part of it. I love working with lists. So, I
Right.
wrote the blog on lists, but
Yeah.
I find a lot of problems that I have. The solution is I need to manipulate a list, and it's not just working with the tables. So I enjoy getting into like list distinct and list select and list, even once in a while I'll do list generate or list accumulate, although those give me headaches when I get into the syntax of them.
Yeah, yeah.
But I love working with lists, and then I'll do all the little manipulations, and then I'll explode it back out into a table and drop it into a spreadsheet or the Power BI data model, wherever that is.
Excellent. And I've seen you. Do you play about mainly now in sort of the advanced editor window, or are you still clicking buttons, or are you in the formula bar? Where are you living?
Uh, I am I am probably 90% in the advanced editor.
Right.
Every once in a while, like even though I use it often, the grouping feature, I cannot write the table group command in the advanced editor. So I'll do that with clicks and buttons to get the thing started. Then I go into the advanced editor and then I spend an hour in there fixing it the way I want it and doing
Right.
all the sub calculations that you can't do through the interface. But
Yeah.
usually I just use the interface to get a thing started that I don't do often enough. But like if I add a column, I go straight to the advanced editor. I never hit the add column button anymore.
That's pretty impressive. I'm still very much a buttons man, and then
Mhm.
and then click and then tweaking the code,
Yeah.
as and when I need, and copying little chunks and moving the order around in the advanced editor. Somebody submitted. I'm doing these little challenges, Power Query challenges, once a month now as well. And someone submitted one the other day, and the sort of code was all beautifully indented, and it was
Hmm.
all, massive list of all this code. And the person had written it all in, I think, VS Studio or something like that. Or
Oh
is
wow.
that? And I was like, oh, really? It's just I wouldn't have a clue where to even start doing that. Whereas,
Yeah.
yeah, if you go from whatever background you've got, I guess you lean on those skills, those programming techniques that you're used to. So yeah,
Right.
but no, I'm still a button clicker. Whatever I can do in the buttons, I think as well I can explain it easier to other people if I've done it with buttons because I've
Oh,
just
yeah.
maybe yeah, but it's more my own ignorance than anything else that I think I'm still clicking away in
Yeah, when I'm training people, obviously it is 95% user interface, and then the other
yeah.
5%, I'll say, well, you know what? If you want to modify that table, the filter, look in the formula bar. All you have to do is go up there and change your text that you filtered by. You don't have to delete the filter and recreate it. And I'll show them how to use the
Yeah,
formula bar. I don't ever go into the
yeah.
advanced editor when I'm training.
It was a great day when they turned that formula bar on
Permanent, yeah,
by permanent because
yeah.
it was just so annoying that it was off. It was even, I know the code isn't that well. It depends on what you click on, but the code isn't necessarily that scary to start with, and not even showing that code, you can select the wrong thing. You can, oh, I think I'm filtering in this, but what you're
Hmm.
actually doing is filtering out something else. You
Yes,
know, or you think you're removing blanks, but you're actually selecting the two items that are there in the code,
right.
and without seeing it, you can just do some crazy things.
Yeah, I think Power Query's code could have been made more user friendly from the outset. I think when people start seeing the hash symbol and then quote, and then
Oh
it's
yeah,
like that just scares them. And I understand because
yeah,
it scared me when I first saw it, and it's
yeah,
still
yeah,
annoying to type. So
yeah,
I wish that kind of stuff had been done in a different way, that it wasn't so weird looking.
yeah. The fact that it refers to the previous step, and if your previous step name is quite descriptive, which is helpful, having your
Hmm.
step names descriptive, but then your next step, half the formula bar is taken up with the step name of the
Right.
previous step, and it's
Yep.
just like, oh, makes it even harder to read and stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah. And where do you see the? Okay, so let me chuck this at you. Power Query calendar or DAX calendar?
Oh, Power Query.
I'm in
Yeah.
there. I don't get the DAX calendar fascination. I don't think it's a competition. I just think it's a power. It's just simpler.
Well,
Is it
so
not?
I think it's easier. I think it's more versatile. The other reason I use it is I like my calendar to always be the first day of the first year of data through the last day of the last year. Well,
Yeah.
if I'm in Power Query, I can say what's the earliest date, what's the latest date, move those to the beginning and ending of those respective years. Boom. Then I do a list in Power Query, generate my lists, and then I add the 30 columns I need for my date table. And so my date,
Yes.
and it moves in time, right? So the
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
year, new data comes in, the date table automatically expands on the next refresh.
Yeah. And look, I don't want to defend the DAX table, but okay, I will play devil's advocate. I believe calendar auto in DAX will actually automatically give you run from the first of your year to the 31st. I think that's right.
Does it? I
So
thought it just went from the first date to the last date, but maybe it
I
does do the year.
I think it goes to the start of the year.
Okay.
But again, two Power Query people just
Yeah,
guessing at DAX.
it's one of those things that if I needed to look at it, I could go figure it out.
Yeah, yeah,
And I know like some of the best DAX tables are, you have your basic list of dates and then it's an add column.
yeah,
Okay, that's very efficient DAX. That's going to compress very well. And again, it's a date table. Who cares? It's 3,000
yeah,
rows for 10 years. What difference does it make? As
yeah,
long as you don't have auto date time turned on, where you get these 3
yes,
million rows where because the date's going through 99.99.
yeah,
So I've seen some very efficiently done DAX tables, but if you look at the code, it's like 800 to 1,200 lines of DAX code, and I'm like, I'll just do it in Power Query.
yeah,
Each column is its own step, and I can edit it, and
yeah.
so, but
If
to
you're
each his own.
if you're I guess for a lowest friction for a
Hmm.
new user comes in, goes, okay, I've got this calendar table, and I on the training course, and you can download it from websites and stuff. You can download Power Query calendar tables, and you say, can I just flag weekends? And you can just easily show them a couple of button clicks in Power Query that gives them like a true false column or a count or a day count or whatever.
Right.
And you can add a little conditional column. So a couple of button clicks, they've got a nice little is weekend flag column. Whereas you're trying to show them in DAX how to edit that DAX formula and where to even go and put some variables in. I don't know. It just seems, for me, it just seems Power Query's easier for newbies and doesn't really have much advantage for advanced folk either. I don't know,
Yeah.
personal preference. And the fact that you can copy and paste it and even centralize it in a data flow potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
The company I'm working with now, it's the date table is a massive data flow.
right.
So
Okay.
it's just handy. You just go out and you grab it. I filter it for the beginning and ending dates and move on.
How much are you using data flows at the moment
Quite a
these days?
bit.
Yeah.
I'm finding there's a lot of data sources. If you've ever worked with SAP, SAP HANA, or Oracle,
No. You,
oh, they're horrible.
oh,
So
okay.
if you can get them in another area, like I've worked a lot with a product called Snowflake, which is a
Oh,
really
yeah.
good cloud database platform that I enjoy working with as a Power BI developer. So if you can get Oracle data in Snowflake, great. If you can't, bring that Oracle data or whatever that backend database you don't like, bring it into a data flow and then work from the data flow. And then it becomes easier because I have worked with some stuff. It's like you add a column in Power Query and you wait 15 minutes for the spinning ants to finish. It's like
Yes.
Microsoft and Oracle don't play well with each other. So,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
even when I'm doing data flows with data sources I like, sometimes it's just the transformations are so big, so voluminous, the Power Query gets bogged down. You break it into stages. This data flow does this one does this, and then finally you bring it all in, throw a little bit of Power Automate on there, so they refresh in sequence, and then it works pretty well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You've been getting into a bit of the Power Automate stuff as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
saw the
you
other day
can,
that it was fairly recently that they added, I think, I could be wrong, that they added the ability for detecting when a data flow finishes refreshing, that you then can trigger like a data set to refresh afterwards, that sort
right,
of thing.
yeah, that's been there a while, but for a while
Okay.
it was a premium feature, and it's
Oh,
fairly recently, like within the last year or so, it's become a pro feature. So now anybody with Power BI can do it. And
Yeah.
basically, it's when this data flow finishes, what do you want to happen? Well, you can have
Yeah.
another data flow refresh or a data set refresh. So that way, it doesn't matter if you've got three data flows in a final data set. You can Power Automate will control that whole thing for you, and you come in the morning and everything is up to date.
And I'm assuming that's still limited by the 8 refreshes.
Um, Per item, right? So three
Yeah.
data flows in a data set is just one refresh for each. So
Yes.
in a pro that would not count as four against your refreshes. It's one. It's
Nah.
eight per.
One
So
per
yeah.
object.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not. That's it's usually
Yes.
okay for a company.
That's enough.
Typically, if you
Yeah.
need more refreshes than that, just pay $20 and get premium per user, and then refresh it 100 times if you want. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. 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 It's an interesting one, the premium per user. It's sort of, there's definite use cases for it, but there's just that limitation of if you are premium per user, only other premium per users can access
Hmm.
the content,
Right.
which I think gets overlooked a little bit sometimes.
Yeah.
So it sounds amazing. Wow, I can get premium for like $20, but everybody looking at the reports needs to pay $20
Yeah.
as well. So,
I love the product. I'm thrilled Microsoft did it, but I do think it is a very niche product
yeah,
because I don't think anybody with 300 employees that need a Power BI license is going to go premium per user. They're just going to go
no,
premium and just
yeah,
get capacity, give everybody free except for your developers. So it's really much for those much either smaller organizations or very specific needs. Maybe you've got premium, but you've got some real heavy workloads, and you don't want your premium capacity overwhelmed with it. So go give a few developers PPU, stick it in a PPU workspace, and so it kind of offloads that. But I think it is a
yeah.
niche product, but I love it. I use it all the time.
So do you end up hitting issues with data flows and the fact that there's that sort of, what is it, the sort of linked entities and compute stuff that goes on with premium that you need that? Do you find that you
I do use
there's
that because
right?
basically it allows for query folding. So
Okay,
it's like connecting to a SQL server. So as soon as I create a data flow, I immediately turn the enhanced compute engine on, and that way,
right.
when my data flows subsequently refresh or the data set refreshes, query folding's enabled, and it just again 10,000 records, who cares? But when you're dealing with a 50 million record table, it's kind of nice when you just want to filter something out. You don't have to download 20 gig of data to keep the 5 gig you want. It
Yes.
pre-filters it it acts as a SQL server.
Yeah, yeah. So, and in terms of the flow of processing, do you tend to like pull in an unaltered data flow table to start with, maybe filtered, and then that's a starting point, and then you feed off that, or do you have that sort of like staging untouched table?
So I well, when you're working with linked entities, you can't actually edit the linked entity, so it comes in unaltered. So it's whatever
Right.
your original source is, but it's kind of in that SQL. I don't know what their backend is. I think it's just in SQL Server, but whatever the technology Microsoft is using. But then I am big on. I don't do a lot of transformations in a table. I break them out into multiple queries, and this one's doing. I'm getting unique values here, and I'm doing stuff. So I
Right.
have a long list of source queries, intermediate queries,
Oh,
reporting
okay.
queries in my Power Query folders. I
Right.
put
Yeah.
variables in another place, and if I have like a big transformation that I'm doing from Azure Data Lake, I might have an Azure Data Lake folder and a bunch of things happening here. Because if I
Yeah.
crack that
Okay.
thing open in 6 months and I just see a list of 50 queries, I'm never going to figure out what's going on. So I structure
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. One thing I came across the other day was picking apart somebody else's data flow, and the diagram view
Hmm.
that they've got there, and that was really helpful.
It is nice.
That was that is so when one day eventually, whenever that'll be, that comes to sort of desktop and Excel, hopefully eventually, that'll be nice because it is good working out
It's
with all these things linked together. Because the query dependencies view in
that's
it's Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not great, is it?
it's okay. You can say,
Yeah.
well, where does this come from? And then 10 other things highlight in yellow. But it's yeah, I'm glad Microsoft came out with that. But they do. I'll love to see that, like you said, in Excel and
Yeah.
in Power BI. It's because
So,
it's a really nice feature.
okay. So normally in the past,
Hmm.
I've played this game called Impossible Questions,
Okay.
where I ask people impossible questions that I wouldn't, or Power Query questions. Unfortunately, I've basically totally run out of questions.
Oh, okay.
Okay. However, I have come up with a new game. So there is a radio show in the UK called Just a Minute.
Okay.
All right. And the concept of this show is the guests, the panels, are given 1 minute to talk about a topic. And it's a competition. This is going to be a competition between you and me. Okay. The topic is going to be query folding.
Okay.
All right. So we have 1 minute to talk about query folding. Either you can start or I can start. It'll be totally up to you. If you hear me pause, or if you hear me say the same word twice, other than query folding or Power Query, those words are allowed. But if you hear me say the word, I don't know, SQL database twice, you say buzz and then you take over. Okay, start talking about
Okay.
query folding. And then if I hear you say or pause or make a mistake or say the word twice, I'm going to buzz and I take over. And whoever's talking at the end of 60 seconds, they're the winner.
Okay.
Okay? So
right.
it's basically you can talk about anything loosely related to query folding. It could be how you do it, where you do it, what it is, where you've used it, as long as it's loosely related. Okay,
Okay.
I'm going to just get my phone up here to get my little stopwatch going. I'll give you a few seconds to have a little think as well.
Okay.
So let me bring up. So do you want to start or do you want me to start? Totally up to you.
I'll start and we'll see how
You'll
long I
start.
last before you buzz me out.
So yeah, any ums, pauses. So you talk steadily.
Okay.
Don't have to rush. And I'm terrible at saying all the time. So if you totally go off tangent or if you repeat some word other than query folding or Power Query, you're allowed those words. If you say any other words twice, I'm buzzing in and taking over.
Okay.
Okay. So on your marks, get set, go.
Okay. So query folding, one of the things I like to do in my data models is make sure my dimension tables are filtered only for the data in the fact tables. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with a function that I found called list contains. And list contains actually
Oh,
when
Buzz, you just said list contains twice.
okay. All
See,
right.
you get the idea? It's quite hard.
Okay.
Okay, I'm taking over. So 19 seconds gone so far. I'm taking over. Okay, go. So query folding is a way of getting your queries to refresh faster. You can connect to a SQL database and various other sources and push the queries back to those sources. And when you refresh, your query will refresh. Oh, I've just said refresh. I've picked
You
myself
said
up
refresh
on
like
that.
3 times right there. Yeah, like right in a row.
You were being kind. You were
Okay.
being kind.
Okay.
Okay, 47 seconds gone.
Okay.
Okay, over to you. Go.
Okay. So if I use that function, I can filter my table, and the SQL query will actually use a folding
Oh, you've
operation.
won.
And
1 minute. 1 minute.
so
Very good.
did that win? Okay.
You are the champ. You are the champ.
Well, see, I had listened to your podcast, and I thought, okay, he's going to come up with all these weird questions, and I'm like looking at the queries and the menus, and then you
Yeah,
change the rules.
I've changed the game on people. So, yeah, I was just running. I was really struggling. And I really like that radio show, so I listen to it all the time. So it's just quite fun.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's really funny. It's been run. It's like one of the longest running radio shows, comedy shows in the UK.
Okay.
It's been around for like 50 years, I think, or something ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's good.
Cool.
Available via podcast.
Okay.
Okay. Worst presentation moment. Have you had any disasters?
Uh, I wouldn't say it's a disaster. It was a training, and it was, of course, virtual, and it was mainly about governance and administration. So not a lot of DAX, no DAX, in fact, and a little bit of Power Query. And I thought I would get cute in, I'd given these people a report. It was three CSV files from PowerShell, which I don't really care for either. And I thought, okay, I'm going to drop these into a directory. And instead of connecting to each CSV individually, I connected to the folder, but they're not the same, so
Yeah.
you can't just expand. And then I created three references, clicked on each one, beautiful, worked perfectly. Then I moved it to the server, and I changed the directory name in the first step, and nothing worked. And I'm
Right.
like, the gateway's not refreshing. I'm like, what is going on? I spent like 5 minutes and I can't get the thing working. Fortunately, we were coming up on a break. And I said, you know what? Let's have a break. I'm going to figure this out. I left my screen going so if anybody wanted to watch the break. And it turns out the way I had done it, Power Query duplicated that folder path in the expansion of the individual files. So I had to go
Oh,
into
right.
M code and change it
Everyone.
multiple times. And I'm like, okay, I'll never do that again. And that was not how I'd rehearsed it. I'd rehearsed it by clicking on, going 3 times and getting three fold.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you can't figure it out. I'm like, I know change the path, but open
Yeah.
up the advanced editor and you're like, why is this in here twice? So
Winging it in presentations is,
exactly, never wing it. I don't care how awesome you think you are. Stick
yeah.
to the script.
Yeah. You feel that little, oh, I could just, no, no. I even shout no in my head sometimes
Yeah,
these days.
yeah.
It's just
So.
like, don't go off script. Okay, nice one.
But the kind of nice thing is, it was in governance and administration. You're like, you know what, people? This is the real world. Things don't always work. So
Yeah.
here's how I troubleshoot the problem. So that it kind of turned into a learning moment, but it's a little
Yeah.
nerve wracking.
And in all those sort of presentations, everyone's on your side. I
Oh
think
yeah,
anyway, and they're there to learn, and stuff goes wrong
that's
for
a good
them,
point.
and everyone's pretty forgiving. So don't. I think the lesson for everybody is don't beat yourself up ever. It's just like
Yeah.
stay calm.
Yep.
If it works, it works. If it doesn't, oh well. um, and any sort of features that you'd like people to vote for that sort of in the ideas forum or anywhere else, or things you see bugging people a lot? What should they improve?
I will stop complaining about Power Query for at least a year if they will just fix IntelliSense.
Oh yes,
It's such a
yeah,
mess.
yeah,
And the problem is I'm not smart enough to use Power Query without the IntelliSense. I don't know all the things, so I have to leave it enabled, and it
yeah,
drives me up the wall. So
yeah,
if they will
yeah.
just fix that, I will be a happy camper. That's the biggest thing for
I
me.
absolutely. I'll put a little link in the show notes as well for people to vote for that idea. There must be an idea up there
Oh yeah.
somewhere.
And they're working on it, but
Yeah, they
it's
know. They know it's a
soon,
problem.
you know.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know what that
yeah.
means.
And it's one of those ones that you just even the simplest thing. Somebody writes a formula, it just doesn't work, and they
Hmm.
don't know why. They think they've written a formula wrong, but IntelliSense has just stuffed it up without them realizing.
Yeah.
And it happens. I say them, I mean me. You know,
Hmm.
and yeah. So it's more of a hindrance than a help,
Yeah, it
which is
can
the
be.
worst thing. If it just didn't work, if it just didn't fill stuff in or didn't show up the right thing, then that's one thing. But it actually changes or overwrites.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, horrible. Um, okay, and anything else of interest happening? Have you got any conferences or anything lined up currently, or is anything on the cards in the
Uh,
next
I
3 to
I've got a
six
couple of
months or
user
so?
group things that I've
Oh yeah.
already set up, so those are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Actually, one's
Okay.
coming up this Thursday, so 3 days from now. Which will already be over by the time this podcast goes out. But
Yeah, yeah.
and then there's a three conferences this year, two of which I've already
Okay.
submitted uh, events for or
All
sessions
right.
for, and another
Yeah,
one I
yeah.
just heard about 2 or 3 days ago. So I'm getting a session ready to submit to that one. So
And
I'm
these are
hoping.
these going to be in person ones?
Um,
or remote ones?
Two of
A bit of
them
a mix.
will be in person. One of them is
Okay,
remote. So
right.
I'm
So
hoping for the
bringing
in
it down.
person. One's in Chicago. One is in,
Oh yeah,
I think it's Washington State. I'm not sure exactly the city. So
excellent.
I'm hoping to be in those.
Yeah,
So we'll
yeah,
see.
all good. I also asked people if they could leave a couple of links in the show notes, as it were. So, a your most or your favorite blog post or article,
Hmm.
and a popular one as well. So, if you know those off the top of your head, let me know. Otherwise, just send them to me afterwards, and we'll make sure they're in the show notes. Do you happen to know what
I,
your
I,
most
I,
popular
I
one
do.
or your favorite?
And I'll make sure to send you the links. One of them is using the grouping function in Power Query.
Okay.
But the problem with grouping is, let's say you want to get you group by month and you want to get top sales. And then you want to get the top customer for that sale. Well, if you use the group function and just put max sale, max customer, they may not be the same thing because the customer
Right.
name is the maximum value. So it could be zebra sales, not the. So
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I went, tore into the table grouping function and wrote, a bunch of custom advanced code, and it works really well.
Right.
And far and away, that is the most popular blog post on my website. So I guess a lot of other people have had the same issue where they're like, hey, I'm putting max, 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 and I'm getting three different things that aren't related. This will fix
Right.
that.
Excellent. We'll throw that one in.
And then
And have you
my
got a favorite?
a favorite, yeah, really simple. When you're pulling data from Excel and you're pulling it from a spreadsheet that has the headers are like 2 or 3 cells thick,
Yeah. Yeah.
I wrote a custom function that will, you just say, here's the table. It's got 4 rows in it, and it'll do the whole thing and collapse them into one, and then spit out your nice perfect table. So that's my favorite.
Nice. I like that.
So
Okay. I'm having a look at that one.
yeah, I'll send you both links though after the thing, and
Yeah.
you can get them in the show notes.
Awesome. Perfect. And sort of wrapping things up,
Okay.
I like to ask my guests if they've had any brushes with fame. So have you bumped into anyone famous? Are you related to anyone?
Not related, but I grew up in around Nashville, Tennessee, so that's famous
Oh,
for
okay.
country music, which
Yeah.
I don't know any country music people. But I've bumped into a number of stars, and I actually flew
Okay.
one time from Nashville to New Jersey, and Ashley Judd was on the plane. And so we got off the
Okay.
plane, and it was one of these little small jets, and we had to stand there and wait for our luggage to be brought off. And so
Yeah.
we were just standing there in the little causeway, whatever, waiting on our luggage. And I'm like, I recognized her, and I've always liked her movies, so I guess that's probably the most
Yeah.
famous
Yeah.
person I've had a more than a brief interaction with.
Were they smaller or bigger than you imagined they'd be? Or about the same?
No, she was just, yeah. I mean, she was kind of a down to
Yeah.
earth person, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, she's kind
Okay.
of,
Cool.
yeah. So it's kind of neat.
Very good. Um, and then finally, I'm going to strand you on a desert island,
Okay,
and you're allowed one item to sort of, while away the hours or help you or whatever it might be, but it must begin with M.
right.
So what are you going to take?
So I'm going to cheat here a little bit because, as I said, I'm in America and I'm from the South. So in the South, we don't pronounce our words quite properly. So we don't even say
Okay.
America. We just say America. Okay. So my favorite drink at Starbucks is an Americano. But when I order it, I just say, give me a venti Americano. So that technically starts with an M. So that's what I'm going to use.
Okay. I'll allow it as long as you put 2 hashtags and a
Right.
quote around it. around it. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks very much for taking the time, Ed. Really appreciate the chat. Um, Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here. I enjoyed it. I
I'll
enjoyed it.
leave links to Ed's blog post and other things in the show notes, so check those out.
Okay.
And keep sharing the magic, and hopefully we'll meet in person one day.
Yes. Hopefully one of these sessions we'll all be there at the same time.
Indeed. Okay, thanks, Ed. Catch you later.
Thank you.